You wanted protagonist democracy.
Let me take up the last one, first, because I can say I know very little about it. I think you have to. I'm sure that there is a great vulnerability of Colombians in Venezuela. That we can be pretty certain that there are many, agents of Colombia, who are functioning, and that they don't function alone. That they function with support from elements in the army and the police of Venezuela. That this is all part of the corruption of the Venezuelan army, and not army, police forces in particular. One of the attempts that are being made now is to create a national police force to try and clean out the corrupt elements, etc. There. But I'm certain that there is a great vulnerability, of Colombians there. Many Colombians, on the other hand, have been getting citizenship, or are able to vote, or increasing, who've been there many years, and are very strong support, for the process. But I think, again, I think you have to have a sense, certainly in the border regions, it's chaos. I mean, there is no authority there that can really, control, the Colombian agents, there. Because it's vast areas that are, not necessarily, well populated, and it's not simply Colombians who are being picked off. It's also the Colombian paramilitaries who are functioning as agents for the latifundists in Venezuela, who are killing, peasant leaders. Happens with impunity. And these are part of the problems of Venezuela. It's not. It doesn't drop from the sky. We're dealing with a country that has this history, and it's not easy to change it. So that's as far as the relationship of Venezuela and Brazil. Well, it's hard. Venezuela has to play ball with Brazil. With Lula, can't do very much in terms of attacking it. Although there are strong differences, there are strong links between the MST and the landless movement and Venezuela. They work closely with the agriculture ministry in Venezuela at this particular point. I think there's substantial support for their efforts, and they're now finally escalating their own demands in Brazil at this time. As far as the question on the self-management, that was the question, experiences. There have been several experiences in self-management. The workers in the electric distribution industry became quite active before the Chavez election and immediately after, in the context of fighting against privatization of the electric distribution companies, and they then, in the course of this, when the privatization was off the books, they were strong in making demands for co-management. And co-management, the way the term is used in Venezuela is not like German co-management, co-determination. It's basically worker management in conjunction with the state. So it's and they began with the state officials in the state electrical company Gaddafi, which was the major part of what had been, what had been happening before Chavez was the breaking up of the electrical distribution company into a lot of small companies in order to make it easier to sell off each of them piece by piece. So they began to work with the existing management, developed a process of co-management, worker committees, making demands upon the management, et cetera, like that. And in Gaddafi itself, the major unit, it suddenly came to a halt. Suddenly the state managers and ministers said no, and they stonewalled every development on the part of workers' committees, and completely frustrated the workers. Some of the great militant, workers in that sector were very demoralized. In contrast, the state electrical distribution firm in the Andes, Cadela, had elected their own president. They were decentralized, and who was a worker. He worked very closely with them in a whole process of self-management, and in which they began to work with their local communities. And so there became sort of this Cadela model of real worker management, working very closely with the managers, and working closely with the community by creating community cooperatives on electric distribution issues, et cetera, like that. Those are two models. One a very successful model, and the other a very frustrating model. Now, the people in Cadela are very concerned right now because there's been a move to re-centralize the company, to move away from the separate units, and they are struggling to ensure that they don't lose their model and trying to spread it to the other sectors of the now sort of unified Gaddafi. That's one experience. Another experience is the experience at Al-Qasa. And I'm talking only about the state sectors, not the recovered factories. Al-Qasa is the aluminum company that, under the then minister for, a new minister for the basic industry, Victor Alvarez, he brought into Al-Qasa one of the aluminum firms that belonged to the Corporation for Development of Guyana, CBH. He brought in, as the president of the company, one of the leading Marxist theorists in the country, Carlos Lanz. And he said, make this a company which runs on worker management. And Carlos has been struggling with this for several years now, and doing, introducing a lot of measures, giving workers more, which workers more and more power, making decisions, et cetera, like that. Right now, it's an absolute battlefield in Al-Qasa, in which there are union struggles happening against each other. And the last I heard was that Carlos is, in fact, probably going to leave as president and go to the Ministry for Science and Technology, working with the Minister of Hector Navarro, who had been the Minister of Education and Superior Education, with whom he had worked before. So that experience in self-management is not is not an unequivocal success, and I understand also that the Environment Minister is raising questions about some of the processes at Al-Qasa, which are disastrous ecologically. But the workers are demanding, that they should not be shut down. So there is a conflict happening there between worker management interests and ecological concerns that is now affecting Al-Qasa. That is, as far as the other question, I'll come back to this other thing. The other question as to the criticisms on Yugoslavia and that I make about Yugoslavia and and whether they're made in Venezuela itself. I studied Venezuela, Yugoslavia, for a number of years. I was very interested in what was happening in worker management there, and my conclusions are sort of clear that it was a disintegrating factor, and became, in fact, increasingly so over the time. I gave a talk at the second Solidarity meeting on, I guess it was 2004, on lessons from Yugoslavia, positive, what happened, positive lessons, negative lessons, etc., like that, which was then published as a pamphlet in Venezuela and pretty widely circulated, I think. I don't know in general what the impact was, but I know that Chavez talked to me about it and said that this was the aspect of the negative was very important. And he immediately responded, to that criticism of the breakdown of solidarity and the self-interest, et cetera, like that. And that's where he's coming from. Very strong Christian, sort of aspects of it. He's, very strong on, sometimes he gives speeches and you have 3 shirts, give one away. into all distribution of wealth, etc., like that. And he'll even lecture the archbishops, etc., and the cardinals, etc., about the Last Supper, how everyone held everything in common, And so he was very receptive to that, and I think that might be a factor there. As far as why not workers' control everywhere now, it'll be nice, but frankly, it's not going to happen. The way Chavez proceeds is he chooses his battles, when he has to fight them. It will happen when the oligarchy in those areas challenge the process. Then he will move in rather than give in. That's the way it will happen. It's not the oligarchy that's the problem. I mean, at this particular point, the problem is the organization of the working class. The problem is 50% of the working class in the informal sector. That's a battle that they don't have to fight if they nationalize everything at this particular point. But if banks don't follow the government's demands, they will be taken over. If Sidor, the steel company, which was privatized, in the previous government, doesn't follow the state policies, it will be taken over. It's a question of responding to the obvious apparent failures of capitalism. That Chavez always can go to the people and say, look at what capitalism is doing. When he has a concrete example, he moves forward. So that's, I think, and when you look at the problems that are happening in Alcasa, it's sort of hard to make the case for, nationalize everything at this particular point. It's interesting, there was an article just recently about the thriving banks in Venezuela, capitalist banks. And one of the bankers or advisor to the bank said, well, he's not going to take us over. Where is he going to get the people to run 50 banks at once? And that's, it's a question of training new people too is an important aspect of this. So I think that my question is, I don't think that what is holding back the revolution at this point is the existing oligarchy. I say over and over again, at this point, the real threat to the revolution is the Chavists, internal Chavists, who are in fact, have their own purposes and have basically said the revolution has gone far enough. That's where the real struggle is going to have to still happen between the base and those Chavists. I think that's more important. Now, ultimately, the coalitions that might be created between them and the existing oligarchy it's obvious that they will make that coalition at some point, but that's when the oligarchy will be, expose itself to another inroad. I don't know whether I've sufficiently answered the question. There was the party question and the internal struggles in the labor movement. The struggles in the labor movement are, they're incredible. It's just a disaster. It's a tragedy, to see what's going on there. In some cases, it's not a question of autonomy at all. It's a question of a political line. It's not necessarily autonomy because there's only at this point, only one faction of the five dominant factions, and there's a minor Marxist current faction, but it's not one of the dominant factions. There's only one faction that is not for autonomy, and that's the faction that is now represented in the Minister of Labor. And that is the one that seems to be unifying the rest of the labor movement against that. So maybe it's been sort of encouraging to see that emerging unity. But as far as Chirino, I think Chirino has really good things to say. He himself did not go into the party, the new party for the Unified Socialist Party. Most of the party that he was involved in forming, almost everyone in the leadership of the PRS, the Party of Revolution and Socialism, has in fact gone into the new party because they have taken, I think, the correct position, which is it's necessary to struggle within that new party in order to not yield it to the oligarchy, the emerging Chavez oligarchy is necessary to have a real class struggle within the PSUV. Torino has stayed out, and there's almost like a sort of a rump committee of the PRS, which is still around. But but Torino is sort of, I view it as a kind of a holding action that if the party is maintained in case things, the struggle inside the PSUV don't work out. As far as the Sam's questions, I don't know whether I've answered the part about the internal struggle. The Army, it's hard to know about the Army. I mean, there is general sort of wisdom that there is a whole cohort within the Army that is not, pro-Chavez, which is a group that received its training mainly between 1992 after the attempted, revolt in '92, and at which point there was a sort of cleaning out of the old structures that allowed people like Chavez and many working class, young people to enter into the Army, and between 92 and 98. So at one point they were referred to as the captains. I don't know what their ranks are at this particular point, but it was clear that they were not, pro-Chavez, and I'm not certain the controls over. Every June is a very critical period in Venezuela, because it's when decisions are made as to who in the Army will be promoted and who will not, who will get command posts. And Chavez is very much personally involved in those decisions and discussions as to who, and many of the people who are sort of in the unquestionable of loyalty will not get command posts. And they have other roles related to their position. But as far as the Army in general, it's generally sort of felt that the Army itself is the strongest support, but there are questions about the Navy and the armed forces. The head of the Minister of Defense is a very strong supporter of Chavez, Bodwell, who's been with him for many years. And then the other question was, I don't know.
There was a question on the communal councils can get together to do collective activities on some.
That's happening. That's happening. There are communal councils that are attempting to work out arrangements with other communal councils to work. That's been part of the process all along, that there are projects that go beyond what the scope of any individual communal council. So neighboring communal councils work together, et cetera, like that. That's a process that's happening. But precise mechanisms for how to do it are unclear at this point, and it's part of the process. That is occurring to work out those mechanisms, but that's the goal. I mean, when Chavez says, all power to the communal councils, and the communal councils are the cell of a new, state, he's not saying the state is going to be atomistic communal councils. He's saying that is the base on which you build the new state from below, and that only can be based, by the communal council meeting and connecting together. Now, how much that's still, though, in local areas, and the question is, how do you connect, say, the communal councils in one region with the communal councils in another region? Well, I mean, you have to find other ways. I mean, they don't necessarily connect them through common economic planning, but you may connect them through ideological things in which representatives from one council go to other councils and tell them how this is how we did it, etc. And it will help you.
I'm going to close the speakers list, except if there are any sisters who want to add. Okay, so I have a large list already from the past.
Oh, thanks. I just wanted to hear, asking from each of you, if you would, what would your opinion